Welcome to the Rural Missions Podcast. We exist to enable rural churches in God's mission. So join us now as we hear stories of hope from across the UK. So welcome to the Rural Missions Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Goody, the CEO for Rural Missions. And in today's episode, I am joined by Pete Atkins. I am so excited to hear some of these stories. I've got to know Pete over the last few days, and I know there's a lot of wisdom and experience for him to be able to share with us. So, Pete, why don't we start off? Who are you? Where are you from? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I was born in the East End of London, on the Mile End Road. I'm a proper Cockney in that sense. My dad was the curate of All Hallows Bromley by Bow when I was born. But we soon left the UK for Australia as a missionary family. We lived in far North Queensland between the Cape York Peninsula and the south part of the New Guinea coastline on a little tropical island. And I was there for 2 or 3 years working amongst Melanesian people when I was a child. We went down to the mainland, and from there I went up to a boarding school run by the Bush brothers, who were kind of Anglican crack troops who were set in to minister out in the bush, out in the cattle stations. And I was there for 5 years, and coming home, for holidays to a beautiful cane town called Mossman, which was proper tropical and a really gorgeous place to grow up. Then we went back up to the main island because my dad was asked to do a more senior role. And at the age of 15, I then got sent back to England for educational purposes. And the headmaster in Australia had kind of decided I ought to be a doctor. I sort of thought, well, I might prefer marine biology because when you lived on the Barrier Reef, that was a very attractive proposition. And the island we were first on was on the Barrier Reef. It was a beautiful place to live. But at any rate, I came back and to do A-levels, and shortly after coming back, my parents decided they'd come back as well. So then marine biology turned out to be Liverpool or Bangor. It wasn't quite the same as the Barrier Reef.
Oh yeah, I can imagine the similarities end very quickly.
So I did medicine, and really as a way of continuing human biology, which I was really enjoying. So I did medicine, and really from a very early stage in medicine, I knew that I wanted to be a GP and live in a community rather than in the I'm not knocking it, but slightly artificial atmosphere of a hospital existence. I wanted to be out in the community. So when I qualified as a GP, we looked for a place that we felt God was calling us to, and to do further training initially and then to settle. And that turned out to be Lincolnshire, which is what brought us to the role I did. So I was a GP in Lincolnshire for nigh on 30 years, I think it was.
Wow.
And yeah.
That's a good innings.
Yeah, it was a good innings. Well, and thoroughly enjoyable. And while I was a GP, our main responsibility was 9 villages here in Lincolnshire. And I'd always been, other than where I was born, I'd always been in rural situations. And when we came to Lincolnshire, that was continued. We lived in a village. We felt like God asked us to live, work, and worship in the same village, which we did for those years. And that's really what brought us to this place. Then, having been there some years, we started a church, as you do. And really, we had a vision to start something which was focusing on those who didn't believe. We didn't want to collect those who did believe. At the time, there was a couple of churches in the village which we'd been part of. We'd been part of the Methodist Church. We felt, though, we wanted to do something which was beyond the village we were in. We felt like God was calling us to work across the whole county eventually and to provide a different way of doing church. Not that there was anything wrong with the chapel we were part of, lovely folks, but a different way of doing church, which was focused on the needs of those who didn't believe, focused on seeing transformation in the rural communities. So that began in about 1995. A church called Threshold, name taken from Psalm 84, verse 10, I'd rather stand on the threshold of the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. And yeah, so we began the journey, and it's been quite an adventure since, really. So now I've retired from medicine and I work mostly in rural UK. So alongside Threshold, which I still help to lead alongside a younger couple, Kath and I work as consultants I work as a consultant for rural ministry, and really pursuing helping the rural church to do new things, to be contemporary and engaging with their communities, to really see transformation by the love and power of Jesus whoever it is we're working with at the time. So that's kind of what I do now.
That's great. That's great. And from our perspective, we're partnering in the gospel.
Amen.
And
Absolutely.
so we are big believers in what rural ministries do. So we're not going to shy away that you've
No.
mentioned that. A few people might be thinking, are
No,
we allowed to say those words?
No, I think we all need to work together. I think we all bring something else, something different to the party. I think we have a whole different range of connections and skills and callings. And the more we can work as an alliance together across all the rural mission agencies, the better. I think that, it's essential at these times that we hear God together and go for it together, and fit in with what each other's doing and cheer each other on. I think that's what we should be doing.
I think that's a good way to go. But let's watch this space. Let's see where we head together as we explore what that means.
I realise I've missed out a very important fact about me.
Oh,
I'm married.
Then, Pete. You're married, yes.
And we have 5 children who are all married, and we have 10 grandchildren. Most of them, 4 of the 5 families near us in Lincolnshire, 1 in South in Sussex. But it's very important dimension of our life. It's
just in case they're listening.
Just in case they're listening.
Can't believe, Dad, you didn't tell them.
Absolutely, I've been in right trouble.
And you seem to be doubling, so that's good. 5 and then 10, and Let's not go there too quickly.
No.
So it's great to hear some of your story. Obviously, England is far different to Australia, but I guess some of the same challenges, some of the same opportunities come. And you were sent back here for education.
Yeah.
And you've alluded somewhat to saying some of the falsehood almost of what it means to be in towns or cities. You wanted to escape some of that. So how did you really sort of process that call to live in a rural area over where you could have had your pick? As a doctor, they're very much in need. How did you really establish, yes, let's focus rurally, let's build community where we are?
It was quite a switch, as you say. I mean, we had nothing against urban, and when I first started training as a GP, our intention was to go back down to the East End of London and get stuck in down there. But we were waylaid about a year before I qualified by being invited to apply for a job in rural Lincolnshire. And we really wrestled with it. And we thought, is this what you want, Lord? Is this where we're headed? But eventually came to the conclusion that it was. My upbringing in Australia was almost entirely rural. And my grandfather was a rural evangelist in the UK. He was a vicar and a very much... he served in a rural parish for 30-odd years. So it wasn't foreign to me at all. It just wasn't what we'd been expecting. But then it grew on us, and it really did grow on us. I mean, it came to the point where we felt that rural for us was really important, and through various things, including prophetic stuff here at Sonic, actually, where we had a sense of people speaking, well, they were speaking over, saying village after village after village. It was a whole mix of what we felt ourselves, but also what others were speaking over us and what we felt by discerning from the scriptures, etc. It just grew on us. So it sounds a bit vague, but we came to a point where we just knew that's what we're supposed to be doing. I worked for Fresh Expressions for a while, or we both did, Kath and I, for I think it was 14 years or something. And in that time, we led the Fresh Expressions stuff for rural UK. And again, that was a very natural choice. We asked if we could do it as things were developing, and we were asked to do the role. It was great. But that then put us in contact with a much wider group of rural folks across the UK. And so apart from leading a rural church, which a certain Mr. Osborne came to check out to make sure we were okay.
Yes, Barry, he definitely wanted to know what was going on.
Yeah, I think he was wondering how a charismatic church would work in a rural area at the time. This was some time ago. But that was good. He was welcome. We had a good chat about it, and he came and saw
they
it.
certainly do work well.
They do work well.
Yeah. So to give some context,
Yeah.
I know you've just mentioned Swanwick. So myself and Pete are both part of the Grand Level network of churches. So to give you some context that are listening, that's why we're here. It's not just a random place that we're mentioning. We just happen to be at our leaders' conference together at the moment. So thought this was an opportune moment to catch Pete and to go, what does it really look like for you within rural mission and ministry, and what does it mean to live in community? So I know this is quite a big question, and there'll be lots and lots of answers that you might have, but what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that your rural community that you're part of is facing at the moment?
There are a few, really. One of them is because we've been in our current community for 14 years or so, those of us who began it are getting older. Now, by the grace of God, the folks we've made friends with, the folks who are becoming Christians, the folks who are also in the community are almost all younger. They're mostly young family kind of age, which is really good. But the challenge we're facing at the moment, and one of them is, how do you make sure that what we've begun remains contemporary and engaging with a younger generation? And it really means those of the younger generation leading and having considerable influence in what happens. Having us there as supportive and to be prayerful and to give wisdom and counsel, but it needs to be led by them. So we're at the moment in the process of figuring out how that works.
And that's quite a bold move as a church leader to go, this is not necessarily about us as the leaders, but actually how do we commission the lay, not that it's lay and ordained within your remit, but how do we commission others, and especially younger people, to take the lead and go, we're here, we're praying, we're releasing. And I can imagine there's a lot of churches listening that is a big struggle to almost let go of some of the reins of, this has been what we've invested in for 50 years or 40 years or 14 years, to then go, it's not my work, but it's God's work. So let me release that. And how would you say that's gone down with those that are part of your church that are a little more engrossed in some of the tradition that you might have formed, even as a newer church?
Actually, they've been wonderful, and they've welcomed it, to be honest. So the church we're part of, Threshold, most of it is now being led by a younger couple. And Kath and I mostly just lead the stuff in the village we moved to 14 years ago to start this new thing. But within the village where we now live, and the community we've begun there, which owes more to monasticism than being a congregation, which we can talk about if you want to, the older ones of us are all for the younger ones taking it on, not to shift the responsibility, not to make them do all the work, but to influence the shape of it for the future, really.
That's good. And I know you've said that you're looking to not just bring in Christians that are around, but to go, how do we create a new generation of Christians, bring people to faith? So what are you doing as a church to be missional in your community?
Well, if I talk about Bardney, where we live, rather than the big, there's a whole variety across the church. But so where we live, we've taken a very the simple way of putting it was we felt God called us to continue to pray for the community, because we had been praying for some time before we moved, and to live missionally, whatever that looks like. And so, by the grace of God, folks have become Christians since we've been there, and they've grown up in a community that is praying a lot and living missionally. And the prayer stuff is intercessory, obviously, for the village and for things going on and for engagement with it. But also we've had quite an emphasis on hearing God together, trying to understand, discern together what he's leading us into. So these folks have grown up in a kind of church that is always seeking to birth new disciples, and is always trying to hear God as to what we're supposed to be doing and what's next. We have this kind of theory from the Gospels that the best place to grow as a Christian, to mature as a disciple, is by being on mission with Jesus, because that's what he did. So we're trying to kind of model that in our way, saying actually the key thing is that we're on mission together.
So what do you mean? Obviously, you're using some of the usual Christian
Sorry.
lingo where we're being missional. Like I get prayer has to be the priority. That has to be the number one. That is a starting point for anything kingdom focused. Or if you want to see a move of God, then ask Him to move. Has to be the first. What do you mean by you're living missionally?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing, as you say, is definitely the prayer stuff. So we meet together every day for prayer. And we meet twice a week in an evening. So that's in the mornings, and we meet twice a week in the evening for worship, Bible, whatever. And but the missional stuff starts absolutely with relationships, with getting to know people in the community, whether it's neighbours or things we're involved in. But we've also, over the years, begun stuff as he's directed in the community, which helps engage other people in a way that's meaningful to them. So we started a number of events, which I could go through, but the things which I think have been key is we began a coffee shop in the village. And this is a village that doesn't think much to itself. It's had a poor reputation in the county. At one point was called the armpit of Lincolnshire because it was very smelly with a beef factory and no one wanted to live there.
Wow.
And it also, when the beef factory closed down, because it was employing 450 people, it really hit the village economically. And it's quite an isolated village, and so it feels like it has to be thrown back on its own resources. So we've tried to do things which add value, which say to people, actually, we care for this place and we want it to feel like a good place to be. And the coffee shop, we decked it out as well as we could in terms of the quality of it. I think we do the best coffee in the county. With
that is a very bold claim. As a previous youth worker that has drunk many a coffee in many a place,
right,
I think I'm going to have to come and try this best coffee in Lincoln.
You do. It's hand roasted in the East End of London and arrives the next day.
Oh.
Union Coffee comes directly from the farmers all over the world, and with their smallest outlet. And it's because they believed in the values that we had. Really, they decided to support us, helped us with training, some kit, and we didn't know we couldn't. We didn't understand they wouldn't normally do this. But they do produce the most fabulous coffee.
Wow, big shout out to Union Coffee then.
Yeah.
It is good. I have tried Union Coffee.
There you go.
But it's obviously not been made to the same standard as I'll find at your place.
Well, they train the baristas in our place. Yeah, we reckon we have the highest percentage of baristas per head of population anywhere in the UK because we've used it as a training base. Wow. Obviously, lots of young people have come through and been trained, which puts them in really good stead when they go to university or move out and find other areas. So we've been providing not only volunteering opportunities and gaining skills, but we've also been providing employment through that. And it's become a great meeting place in the village. And out of it, we do something called community, which is really corny, spelled at the end TEA.
And I was going to take a wild guess that it had TEA at the end.
Where people bring food, we just all bring food, put it on the table and do tea together. And it's mostly young families. We've had 55 people. We've had a huge number of people at it. And it's a great place for making relationships. More recently, in the last year, as another way of engaging with the village, we met, because when we began, it was the most deprived village in the district. And wages aren't high, even in two-wage families. We have a huge number of pupil premium and kids in the school. And we had people who were really scared of the last winter or the winter before with food costs and fuel costs. And so we decided to do a rural pilot of a community grocery. And that's at the back of it's a building adjacent to the coffee shop. So we began that a year ago, and it's been amazing, absolutely amazing. We've got 30 volunteers for the coffee shop, 30 volunteers for the community grocery. And that community in each, if you pardon the pun, is where the conversations happen. They know this is a Christian enterprise. The managers are both Christians. And it's great. They're rubbing shoulders and doing something meaningful with others. And I think we were more or less pushed into doing an alpha course soon after the coffee shop opened because the volunteers wanted to know what was making us tick.
Wow,
it was really cool.
That's an incredible story to have, and for many of us, where we're thinking, where do our volunteers come from?
Yes.
Actually, as you start to meet the need that's in the community, rather than going, come and support what we're already up to, but how can we support you
Yeah.
well, let me support you in supporting us. Is a great starting place to be missional. That's good.
Absolutely, and it's meaningful, and it's in a place which is. We listened hard for 2 years before we decided there's a coffee shop that should go into those particular retail units, and we asked the village. We said, "What does it need? What can we do together?" And the other good story with the grocery is that, as well as with the coffee shop, is that all the churches are doing it together. So in the village, there's an Anglican and a Methodist church, both struggling a bit, and a Catholic church which closed down because it couldn't sustain itself about 2 years ago. And all three of those communities, as well as our church, have contributed financially to the starting up of the grocery and have been part of its development. And so we found that in both places, it was often Christians that volunteered to begin with, but they were soon very much outnumbered by those who didn't necessarily have any allegiance to any church, but were happy to help and serve in this way and be part of the team. And that's been a really good point of contact, engaging with people. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question, but that's one of the ways.
Yeah, it's a great way of thinking missionally, is how do we engage where the community's already at and meeting the needs of our community. Now, I know when we spoke yesterday, Pete, you mentioned there was one other way that you engage with your community, and it's not just over coffee. You go later into the evening, and you gather a slightly more informal way of worshipping and gathering people together. What's that one, Pete?
It was a happy accident. So it began because one of our kids was doing a live release of some of the music she'd written. So we gathered one or two friends to come and listen to it. And Kath, my wife, being Kath, provided cheese and wine. So we're watching this stuff on the screen, having cheese and wine. The youngsters amongst us seem to think that therefore should happen every time we meet after that, because they really thought it was a great way of going about doing stuff. So we invented something called Friday Night at the Barn, which is now known as Cheese and Wine Church by those who come. And it's basically for those who are exploring faith. So, for example, it happens most Friday nights, but we've recently done, in that context, the Alpha videos, which has been really helpful for some in firming them up in their faith and so forth. You're not talking large numbers. It's a relatively small village, so there's usually probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 people exploring stuff, and then some of us who've been on the road a lot longer. It's a great way of doing it. You know, we asked some of them recently, if for their generation we could invent church, what would it look like? And the two ladies at the time just immediately said this. In other words, so now it looks like cheese and wine, and we maybe have some sung worship, we maybe don't. We're going through Mark's Gospel or doing the Alpha videos. We're praying for each other and for the needs that they're facing. We're answering theological questions where So, for example, the other day I said to them, let's do any questions about what's going on at the minute? And one immediately piped up and said, yeah, I've just been to a family christening, and my brother asked me, and his brother's not Christian, brother asked me, why was Jesus silent during his trial? So suddenly we get into something like that, and that gets you into the Old Testament prophetic material. It gets you into the sacrifice of Jesus. It gets you into, as a lamb before its shearers is dumb. You find yourself suddenly in areas that you have to kind of, without being able to look it up at the time, get on with. But it's really good, and it's genuine, it's authentic, it's helping people where they're at in real life.
And if nothing else, it's something I can imagine. Well, it sounds like Kath especially enjoys cheese and wine and having a few people around. So what better way to engage your community than to open an invite?
She has a super developed gift of hospitality. That's what it is.
That's great.
And she exercises it really well. She's one of the bakers. So all our cakes in the shop are home baked. So our kitchen is one of these certified kitchens that does that. We've got 5-6 home bakers now.
Wow. So I need to come and spend a whole weekend, I think.
We better get you on.
Enjoy the coffee,
first.
enjoy the cake, cheese and wine on the Friday night, a bit of Alpha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Explore Mark's Gospel. Like I'm open to all those things.
Okay.
But there's so much that we can take from that of how are we inviting people into what we're up to, and how are we part of what they're up to as well. And that is a whole part of what it means to be missional and to share Jesus by being with and being incarnational in our ministry approach. Is I'm doing life with Jesus, but I'd also love to do life with you. And so I'm going to make myself available in those spaces.
Yeah, so a great example of that is the first young lady we came to faith and was baptized. Two of them were baptized on the same day. And we baptized her on a Sunday afternoon. She became manager of the shop on the Monday morning. But because she created such a great community in the shop, we've got a very active football club in the village, mostly kids. And the head coach guy came to her and said, "Would you please join our committee?" Okay, but why? Because we want the culture you bring. We want you to do the welfare stuff. We want you to bring your values into this club so that it's more wholesome and more friendly and less. There was a bit of contention here and there. So she started involved in the football in the village now, which is great.
So thinking contention, and as we're heading towards the end of our podcast, I can imagine over the 14 years in that context and in other places that it's not always been such plain sailing. And I'm not diminished by the thought that only 3 or 4 are coming to engage with this, because if you look at the size of a population around, 3 or 4, a lot of bigger churches in urban contexts where they've got 20,000 people that they're trying to engage with, or 50,000 or 100,000, 3 or 4 doesn't sound like many, but it's 3 or 4 lives. And especially in a village context where you've got 3 or 4 out of maybe 200 or 1,000 that live in your locality, that is an impressive space to be able to operate within and to really grasp hold of. So I think it's important we hear those stories and we rejoice in the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, because it is making an impact. But what would you say is one of the bigger challenges or difficulties that you've faced as a Christian living rurally, trying to live missionally?
I think keeping the focus on that. I think like with any pioneering venture, you often end up with folks that you rightly have to look after, but that can then pull in a lot of the resources and take them away from the missional front end. So you have to find a way of doing life, which is both, where you're true to Jesus' compassion for people and looking after folks who are amongst you, especially if they come in with all sorts of challenges that they're facing, but not pull back from engaging with others. And one of the keys to it, I think, is our prayer rhythm. So every day we're praying for what's going on. Every day we're interceding. Every day we're asking, Lord, what do we do about this? What do we do about that? We're praying for family difficulties or exams or school refusal or somebody's ill, or but also for our neighbours, for the friends who are coming on Friday night, it's all that. And we've got to a place now where we really couldn't not pray. I mean, it's just that too many negatives. We have to pray.
Yeah,
basically,
it's a good place to be.
It is, and our daily prayer stuff, we couldn't sustain the level of capacity or activity that we have without that constant referral back to God and asking for His grace to do stuff. And I think one of the challenges has been exactly that: is how do you maintain an outward-looking focus, care for everyone around you, get in tune with God's pacing of the thing, not do things in too much of a rush, not be too busy because you need to be available for people. It's those balances but it's been good doing that in community. None of us are on our own trying to figure that out. We're doing it together. And because we live quite closely in community, we're in different households, but we meet each other regularly, see each other around the place. That's not always plain sailing. You've got to make sure that the relationships remain sweet within the community. And we've all got our own little personalities and our sort of corners that need rubbing off, and God uses those to mature us, which is great. But it also needs work and attention, and so it's.
Yeah, so there's so many things that you might be able to take from this podcast of invite or missionality or engaging community where they are, inviting them into your spaces too. What does it mean to be praying daily for our community?
Yeah.
Many of us have it on our prayer list, but how often are we intentionally putting ourselves before the Lord and going, what does it mean for us to be your salt and light in this space? What are you calling us into and out of at times as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that we love to end our podcast with is to hear stories of hope, to hear something of what God is currently up to in different contexts, in different rural areas. So do you have a little story that you could share with us of what God has done recently in or around you?
Yeah, I think I'll use the example of the community grocery probably. As I said, people were really scared of the winter coming up with fuel costs and food costs. And we wanted to try this as a pilot. And we had to find the food at low cost and make it available to others. And we did it. We thought FareShare was going to help us, and then they closed down just before we started. So we had to go and find other ways of doing that. And God really helped us with that. Everything from farm shops to car boot sales to low-cost supermarkets to the farmer down the road is giving us free potatoes to Walker's Crisps, who gave us 2,500 packets of barbecue-flavoured Quavers.
Wow.
Etc. Wow. So anyway, that was a challenge. But now we've got to a point where some of the single mums are saying to us, and some of others who are really struggling financially, are saying, this has really helped me survive. I'm saving £40 a week on my groceries by shopping here rather than having to get transport into town or shopping at the more expensive co-op in the village. Having said that, we're also the community champion for the co-op. They're really helping us, so this isn't a competition. So what's happened is that people are finding it an amazing place to come to, a hub where they can find friendship, have a coffee while they're there, a place that's open, a place where they can discuss faith if they want to, and at the same time feel much more secure in terms of their finances.
That's great. Well, thank you, Pete, for your time and for all your wisdom and insight that you brought to us. If you want to know more about rural ministries, feel free to check out our website. There'll be links on there. You can hear more about Threshold Church. Just do a Google search, Threshold Church. Is it Threshold Church Lincoln? Is that the best way to Google for you?
Find it doing that. Yeah.
But so much to take away, so much to process and think through. But if nothing else, remember, when you pray, things happen. When you don't, things don't. So maybe your starting point could be, let's pray more regular. Let's start to gather around our church and our community and be more intentional in that. And then God will continue to stir you and open up the ideas and the resource that you need to engage your community to see a community transformed in His power by His name. So thank you to Pete Atkins, Dr Pete Atkins. I'll give you your proper title as we end. That's it. But thank you all for listening. Do check out our next podcast, and thank you for listening. God bless. To find out how we can support your church, head to ruralmissions.org.uk.